My name is Sasha. We're starting a new podcast which will focus on various stories that will be interesting to developers and entrepreneurs. And it will focus on community-owned services, on open web. Today we are with Roneil from Audius.
Hey Sasha, it's great to be here.
So we can start with your story. How did you get into crypto space in the first place? I know you were building Venmo for Bitcoin back in the day.
Yeah. I feel like being in this space in 5 years, I've lived 5 lifetimes, right? It's like so much has changed. So I really got into Bitcoin actually because of this liberation technology group on campus at Stanford. So basically it was a group of folks that got together to talk about what are technologies that help give power back to people, especially in oppressive regimes. So like how can we use technology to give people more freedom, right? And that's the angle that I learned about Bitcoin from, and I was just fascinated by it. I was also a computer science student at the time and had been doing some research and a lot of like my kind of schooling and classwork and whatnot in distributed systems. So it was just like the perfect timing for when it hit me. I was like, this is so cool, right? And I kind of went down the rabbit hole from there. So I started mining around that time with my co-founder Forrest at Audius now. And then that led to a great spring break vacation. We decided to sell most of what we had like in 2013 and go on a great vacation. And then led to eventually founding this company called Backslash. That was basically Venmo for Bitcoin is how I described it. We never raised money for monetize the service in any way. We grew to like 25,000 monthly users, but just couldn't figure out how to grow past that. And that's like teeny tiny for a consumer product, right? So decided to wind that down and move on, and ended up finding my way over to Kleiner Perkins. So me and a couple of others started Kleiner's seed practice. So Kleiner, as a venture firm, historically did mostly like consumer social and enterprise investing, but there was kind of a sort of avant-garde seed practice that we started up to invest in like the most bleeding edge areas, and I covered crypto for that. So I participated in the seed for Lightning Labs, Elizabeth Stark's company, and a few others at that time, but ultimately, wanted to get back to building stuff and left in 2017, noodled on and hacked on a lot of different things. And Audius was an idea that my co-founder Forrest and I had talked about and considered for 4 or 5 years. We started to see the kind of, what was playing out in music around 2014 and 2015, and especially what was happening to our favorite creators at that time that I can get into more as we dig in, and really wanted to create something that was community owned, community operated, censorship resistant, where the rules could not be changed out on artists after they'd created their following here and after they'd grown. But what finally changed for us, like end of 2017, early 2018, was that we felt like the underlying tooling available to us was sufficiently mature that it would be possible to build this higher level use case without like us having to build our own blockchain, us having to build our own file system, et cetera, right? Like we can only do so much as a single company, and now we're 12 people full time. There's just not so much that you got to pick your battles, right? And building file systems and layer 1 solutions were not our battles. Distributing music was. So that's how we got here.
And you were both into the music at the time?
Yeah, we were both huge electronic music fans. And that was where really in that community, we just saw this carnage created by all of our creators getting deplatformed, demonetized, et cetera, primarily from SoundCloud at that time, but from other networks as well. It kind of coincided with SoundCloud signing a deal, like kind of a record licensing deal with the labels and enacting a lot of new policies on this network that they had that, for the most part kind of favored the very, very big artists at the expense of the long tail that initially created SoundCloud's network, right? But yeah, so we were both big electronic fans and kind of followed a lot of the same people. And that, it was talking about how, kind of seeing our favorite content disappear, that's what prompted this.
And did you read about it in the news, or did you go and talk to those musicians and kind of learn about it like firsthand about their problems at the time?
Yeah, so it was reading about it and kind of like, I guess just as a listener, seeing my favorite content being unavailable now or getting taken away. And then also there were some friends of ours in school who were music producers and whatnot. So we were able to kind of hear a little bit more from like their perspective on this, but it was mostly just prompted by like this kind of personal pain, which was that like there were mixes and songs that I loved that disappeared, and I still can't find those. Right, they're just gone forever from. They're probably on so and so artist's hard drive somewhere in the basement, but they don't live online anymore, and that's just a real tragedy.
What was the first thing you did when you started the company?
We started Audius like early to middle 2018. So the first thing I guess we did really was kind of prototype and before raising money or anything, like built out a very simple proof of concept to convince ourselves of the thesis I just gave you, which was that this architecture and the tooling was mature enough for us to actually go do this, right? It was us being able to like end-to-end stream content via IPFS and play it without having it, stutter, skip, without it taking like 30 seconds after you click play to start hearing audio, like us being able to hack around some of these, earlier limitations that some of these technologies had was ultimately what gave us the confidence to say like this could work. And we had the hunch that if we built this, it would work, but we've ultimately been able to validate that later. It was one of the challenges I think in this space is that like the amount of upfront investment in engineering time and effort to ship a product that's decentralized from day one is substantial. And there were parts of the Audius strategy that we could not validate until just a few months ago. So it's been a crazy ride. But yes, so soon after that, we ended up raising capital, building out a team, building out initial version of the product, brought it to market like early 2019 in like a very alpha state, onboarded some artists by hand, learned from them, interacted with them, iterated, eventually went to kind of a general availability release end of September, early October 2019.
How did you find your first musicians?
It's a mix of things, actually. We wanted to make sure that you can do BD and outside sales and sign up big people, right? What we wanted to really vet in that alpha phase was that there were scalable ways for us to bring the long tail into Audius. So we actually started out just doing some very simple kind of a mix of inside sales techniques and then just community building and community advocacy, putting out content, kind of content marketing more generally. And that's how we brought in our initial users. One of the things that kind of blew us away in this space was that in a kind of a cold email campaign, like the typical sort of yes-where multi-stage drip kind of thing, we were seeing conversion rates of like upwards of 25 to 30% from like cold email to like uploading their first piece of content on Audius, which was wild. We actually had to like pump the brakes hard on that campaign because we just couldn't handle all the people coming, like, I don't know, you were in a past life, did sales, like, it's not what you expect, right?
Yep.
Yeah. This is a good problem to have, but just kind of blew us away. There's so much latent demand for this thing that we just needed to activate. But yeah, that was kind of it. And we did do some of our kind of so-called elephant hunting or kind of outside sales from the enterprise standpoint, but that was really just, at that stage, just to validate that like big artists would also care about this if and when we built it.
And at the time you were pretty much engineering team, or you had some people on the business side too?
Yeah, so my co-founder Forrest and I did most of this. So we're both kind of engineers by background, but don't do too much of day-to-day engineering work anymore at the company. But the majority of the team right now is engineering. It's just been basically my co-founder Forrest, myself, and then about 4 or 5 months ago, we started working with a guy named Clayton Blaha, who was one of the co-founders of Ausla, which is Skrillex's label, and he's done a fantastic job for us, kind of in that, like in the realm of outside sales, I guess you could say, right?
Yeah, maybe some of the things would be interesting for the audience. Also, your fundraise, like how did that go? How long did it take? How did you approach it?
To provide some context on the kind of the times that we were in when we raised money, this was just 2 months or so after the ETH all-time high, right? Which we still haven't crossed today, right? So crypto was like on fire at that time, and everyone in the valley was very, very excited to be looking at and talking to crypto companies. So just as a function of the times that we were in, we were able to put together a financing very, very quickly, kind of from process started to like basically at least like verbally having the round committed and together, not having the paperwork done and all, was only about a 7 to 8 day process for us. And we raised $5.5 million at that time. So we were very fortunate that the times were what they were, but also that Forrest and I had both founded things in the past. I had worked in venture in the past, and we were able to kind of go to folks that we knew well and had worked with and trusted over many years of time. That that high degree of trust was able to we were able to get that done very quickly, right? Just because I think folks were kind of more excited about like us, honestly, than they were about the opportunity, which I think for seed is kind of typical.
And how also do you think about engagement and metrics you track today? Like now that you're, with quite a decent amount of engagement right now, like how do you think about like what's most important for you to drive in terms of adoption?
Yeah, so we've been blown away again by the response we've gotten here, and today we've got about just nearing 100,000 monthly users on Audius coming, listening to music, in some cases uploading music, etc. Over 40,000 tracks shared. So what we really care about right now is artist engagement and artist retention. Those were the primary focuses. We feel that if you can provide a great experience to artists and get them excited about what you're doing, they will have an incentive to use their existing distribution to bring their fans to you. That's the way that we can scalably and virally acquire, many more users for every user that we bring in. So these are the things we track most closely. Right now, we feel like we're in a really good place from kind of this retention side, and it really is just a question of doubling down on growth. And you kind of see this typically in consumer opportunities where you kind of you sort of swing back and forth to some extent between optimizing retention versus optimizing growth, and we've been fortunate to be able to we only launched this 3 months ago as we're speaking today. So we've been very fortunate that we struck a nerve quickly and earlier, and our sort of the early breakage that happened in Audius in things that we, as you scale, things break along the way, and you have to fix them. And in our case, that issue is compounded because when we have to fix things, we're shipping it, like it's not like we can ship it, right? We're shipping it to this decentralized network of nodes that are operated by community members. The latency for getting upgrades out is quite a bit higher, right? And I think that's one of the really interesting challenges that I think a lot of teams in the space are grappling with right now, is that we kind of have to unlearn all of what we learned around continuous deployment and just chuck it out the window. This is like, we're a consumer product company that operates like an on-prem enterprise company. It's just a very different paradigm, right? Certainly when things are as fragile as they are right now. So it's just super different.
And how do you improve that going forward, that particular aspect?
In terms of how quickly we get people to upgrade or to migrate to things, I think it's as this kind of gets into the like crypto economic design of a protocol, right? You start to create, as you go through this learning phase and start to understand what are the norms in your network and what are norms that would be like reasonable to expect of participants. You start to codify those rules, I think, into the kind of into the protocol itself, right? Which is to say that you can create SLAs around upgrades happening within some amount of time after being kind of agreed upon by the community, things like that. But it's something that we're still learning from the community on. I think it's just a very different paradigm, and that's really how you solve it. Like basically, you can create slashing conditions around the breakage of those SLAs, right? And that won't like make the problem go away, but at the very least, you can create some guarantee that likely the majority of participants in your network will upgrade within some given time frame if there's a penalty if you don't, right?
And I remember also last time we talked, you mentioned that there's quite a bit of word of mouth happening on the musician side of things, right? So people actually bring like some bigger names. They're kind of like, a lot of them, they're connected to each other and they're kind of like spreading the word about.
Yeah, it's been really cool very humbling to see people that I've listened to their music for some cases 7 to 10 plus years, like finding out about us and signing up on their own. It's pretty cool, and almost all of our growth so far has been driven by this kind of grassroots sort of mechanism, right? Which is that when someone shares a piece of content on Audius, they'll share it out with their distribution, with their fans, either via Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or whatever. That inevitably brings people in some of whom are artists who upload more music, and then the cycle repeats itself. And that kind of viral feedback loop has been our kind of primary growth engine up until today.
Interesting. And also, how do you think about also like making crypto a lot more accessible to like general audience?
Yeah, this is a topic we could spend the whole podcast talking about. I think it's really, really important to be able to provide users the benefits that decentralization and crypto more generally can provide them without breaking all of their existing mental models and paradigms for interacting with products. You should not have to have a software engineering background to be able to interact with a music streaming service, right? This is not like a correct way that things should be, but that's unfortunately the reality on the ground today in crypto, right? And while on the one hand, like it's been extremely beneficial and amazing to see what this level of interoperability has created around things like DeFi and other areas of crypto. The really negative flip side of that is that we're forcing everyone to interact with products from the same paradigm, right? But to kind of make this a little bit more clear with an analogy, like you don't treat the wallet in your pocket, your physical wallet, not your crypto wallet, the same way that you treat your bank account, right? Like if I said, Sasha, hand me your wallet, I'll want to see your driver's license, you'd say, sure. If I said, Sasha, give me your bank login so that I can I don't know what, you would obviously say no, right? And I think in crypto, people need to understand that like not everything is your bank account, and there needs to be some kind of gradient of what we expect of people dependent upon like what the service is asking of them, right? Yeah. Like I want to be, I certainly want to be asked if I'm putting $1 million into a collateralized debt position in Maker. I don't want to be asked every time I repost a track in Audius, right? These are just such vastly different things that today we treat them the same.
Yep. And so for us to bring a lot of people into this market, is it so this usability needs to be solved, or is it also like product teams are not joining today because of like limited traction happening like in the industry outside of a couple examples?
So I think it's both. I think usability needs to be solved in the context of a specific use case. There's no generalized solution to usability. And I think that's also what's like frustrated me a little bit about seeing kind of the how things have gone in the space, is that like you can't just solve usability for everything, right? But I think on a use case specific basis, like people can spend more time like working on this. So I would certainly say in your dichotomy there, it's the latter. I think we need more strong product teams in crypto, and usability will inevitably improve because no No good product person would want to, ship this kind of broken, a broken interaction model, right? That's not like something that they're going to do. I think that's kind of the approach we've generally taken at Audius, has been very much like a user and product first kind of mindset and mentality, which is that it should be possible for us to provide users the benefits of decentralization without like hitting them upside the head with the fact that the product is decentralized. You can market the benefits to them without explaining, like building on crypto is like a choice in your tech stack, right? If you're a normal centralized product, you don't market your product by saying you're built on MySQL, right? That's not like a thing that someone would do. But in crypto, people seem to think this is a good reason for a given product to exist. And that's just not the case. People care about what your thing can do for them, not how it was built.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've been on some panels about like blockchain gaming, and it's like almost as if like, like if you go back a couple decades ago, people not refer to games as like, hey, I built this database game. It's very interesting. Like nobody refers to games as database games, and in this industry, somehow we do.
Yeah, it's like why would you want that? I guess that's really the question, right? But if you can tell someone, hey, like the in-game objects that you earn from all your work, that's actually like transferable value. People would say that's pretty cool, right? I think it's just like a different perspective on the same value prop or benefits can create a huge change in perception.
Mm-hmm. And so also like looking into the future, how do you think about how this industry will evolve? Because I'm sure you don't think it's just about music as one use case. Here, the notion of community-owned and governed services is something like that will be manifested in many different kinds of use cases. So how do you think it will evolve overall?
Yeah, so music was, for us, something that like, we personally very viscerally felt the pain around, and that like we were motivated to fix. But I think there are many, many other areas that could serve from like a similar kind of treatment. And I think you hit the nail on the head there with the fact that at its core, the ethos here is that these platforms that people come to rely on for information, for disseminating, in our case, music, or it could be video, it could be written text, like think about the kind of Facebook or Twitter use case. People rely on these things for their livelihood in some cases, and at the very least for kind of the information that they see and hear and learn about the world around them. We feel very strongly that these networks should be owned by the same people who are creating the value in them, right? As it stands today, when you use Facebook, you are the product, not the customer is the businesses that sell ads on Facebook, and you, the user, are the product that Facebook is selling to those advertisers. And that's just fundamentally always going to misalign the incentives of Facebook with the incentives of you as a user, right? What crypto enables us to do is create alignment around those incentives in a way that's never been possible before, right? This this thing that we're creating with Audius can be owned by, controlled by the community in a way that like it was never possible to make a service that acted that way before. So there are a huge number of, I think, second order benefits from that. I mean, everything from like permissionless higher level innovation on top of the primitives that exist to complete transparency, right? Like we can't pull the rug out from the artists on Audius, and we can't change the rules on them. But there's so many other areas that could benefit from these same things. I mean, I think you look at like basically any product that consumers are interacting with on a daily basis, and especially marketplace products, which is what, how we think about music, the opportunity and position that a centralized marketplace operator is in is always fundamentally misaligned with the incentives of the market that they are servicing and creating, right? So that I think applies to like an Uber or Airbnb in some cases. I would even see like Facebook or Twitter as a marketplace, right? In that they're basically like placing connecting businesses and users, right? That's what makes them money. That's their business model, not like helping you share pictures of your family or whatever, right? That's just that's what hooks people in, but that's not how these things are monetized, and that's not where their incentives lie.
Some skeptics would say that, well, but those marketplaces that came online, like the last 10, 15 years or so, they take margin, yes, but they kind of had to bootstrap and kind of build demand and supply of the network, and therefore they took this margin and kind of they needed those money, they raised money to kind of do both supply and demand, and it's very challenging to do multi-sided kind of networks. So what would you say to those people who would say like, well, fundamentally it's so hard for new kinds of marketplaces to do that without having as much control over it?
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point, right? Which is why for music, we were able to solve such a visceral pain for creators that they would, this was an area where like we could build a product with these decentralized tools that's like enabling something that was never possible before, right? Which I think is not to the same extent the case with like the other marketplace products, right? But I do think the kind of, there are different ways to bootstrap supply and demand in a way that like keeps incentives aligned, right? Like when you have a token-based network, you can potentially like mint and distribute new value to the people who are joining and contributing value to the network, right? Like what if every time an Uber driver signed up for to drive on Uber and did their first like 100 rides or whatever, arguably they're adding value to the network by increasing driver liquidity, et cetera. What if they were granted like stock in Uber in exchange for doing that? Now Uber can't do that because laws prevent them from it, but also like it's just not the way that business was designed to operate, right? But I think that's what we have the opportunity to do in crypto, is to like create a fundamentally better business model that you could literally like, rather than having to spend money on growth, you can like, the network can mint new value in order to enable growth, right? Like you can think about like, tokens in some cases have this kind of very counterintuitive mechanism, which is that like more distribution of your token, as in like the token being in more people's hands, can in effect like create more value in the underlying thing, right? And when you can so fundamentally align like what's positive for the network, which is like increasing liquidity and growth, with what an individual holder and user of that token can capture, I think you can basically kind of crowdsource and scale the types of things that like Uber would have had to raise like gobs and gobs of capital to do themselves.
How do you go about also bringing more people into this industry? Like I'm working with some like Web3 native teams, and kind of they sometimes don't know as much about entrepreneurship, so like they need some help on like how to build a company side of things, how to adopt like market first approach. Then sometimes I see some repeat entrepreneurs, they need help on other side of things, more like Web3 themes is something they need to learn more about. But overall seems like that the rate of entry into the space is fairly low today. Like, so how do you think about that?
We have a huge diversity problem too. It's not just, I think, kind of the rate of entry being too low. I think it's also this, our community is often toxic to newcomers, which is really just a horrible thing, right? So anyway, I think that's a whole nother kind of can of worms to open up. But suffice to say, like I think that's it's a huge problem. Crypto is seen generally as this fringe movement that is unwelcome to new people. Unwelcoming to new people. And what we need to do, I think, as a community is, signal our intent to help bring new people in, to educate them. And yes, I think there's so much kind of existing talent and good people working on, or who've come up working on like Web 2 services that folks like us in this space can learn so much from, right? We've been able to benefit greatly from like being able to draw on kind of that expertise at Audius. And I think that's a really important thing you need to be able to kind of rapidly educate someone on what they need to know and bring them into the fold of this community when you hire them into your company, right? But yeah, it's I don't think there's any silver bullet there. I think this is like, you have to be done on a per company and kind of basis. And right now, I think we're one of the only ones that's, actively kind of like, we actively want to hire people who are not Web3 native. All of our engineering team is not people who've been like Web3 native. I'm the arguably like, Forrest and I, my co-founder, are the only ones on the team who are kind of like Web3 native builders as such, just because we came up mining and doing these things. And it's kind of a like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Like, there's no reason to chuck out like 99% of what, what used to work in Web 2 land, because most of those things still work here, right? It's being able to improve on that small number or small percentage of the dimensions that Web 3 can, while like using the best of the learnings and lessons that we can from everything else to do well, right? This is also, I do feel like a lot of teams in this space feel that like, because Web3 is such a different paradigm, they should kind of like chuck out and rethink like all of the other aspects of like company building, community building, et cetera. And I think that's just not, it's a misguided approach, maybe a right way to put it.
Yeah, I agree. Kind of like what things people learned here in Silicon Valley since like beginning of it, like in like 50s, 60s, 70s. It's a lot of it still applies to like company building, right?
Yeah, and community building. And I think community building matters to crypto apps earlier than it does to most traditional web companies.
Yep.
But like all the mechanisms for building community that used to work still work.
And you have kind of like new tools in your toolkit as well.
Exactly.
As you mentioned.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Last question I had, if you have anything to share about Audius, like particular aspects of things you focus on, either like your telephone line or experimental cipher that you're doing with musicians, like what do you prefer to share with community?
Yeah. So these are all things that we've kind of done to build community within Audius. So everything from we host these periodic competitions for music producers. So like either, taking a given sample or taking a given, some sort of inspiration for what you make your song around, and saying like, who can make the best or coolest sounding thing around this. And then we bring in someone from industry to help judge. So we've had like A&R folks that help scout for talent for people. And we've had artists before that will come and judge these competitions. It's been really fun. People create really, really cool things when you give them that kind of latitude. So that's been really cool for us. Like, Discord as a way to like engage with and keep a pulse on like how people are thinking about Audius and how people are using Audius has been invaluable. So we have an artist Discord with, last I checked, over 2,000 artists there just hanging out, sharing production tips, finding other people to collaborate on tracks with, things like that, right? And even though those use cases aren't necessarily like a part of Audius, the product, creating a space for that to happen has helped us immeasurably. Even just understanding like what are the problems that these folks care about the most, right? And ultimately, like they're one side of our marketplace and the side that for the foreseeable future we're focused on.
So it sounds like you're learning from them for the product, but they're also learning from each other, and that's how community grows.
Totally. What we love to see is when we don't have time to get back to someone's question about Audius, and like as in say they ask the question at like 2 a.m. Pacific, right? Oftentimes by the morning when we like wake up and get back on, someone in our community will have answered the question and answered it like just as well as we could have. And that's really cool, right? When you see people internalize like kind of this ethos and mentality that you're creating around this thing and starting to like, reshare those learnings back to people. It's very cool.
Cool. Well, sounds good. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me, and excited to have been able to come on.
Thank you for listening today. You can find more episodes of this podcast at openwebcollective.com, where you can also apply for either cohort or founder program. Again, it's openwebcollective.com. If you've enjoyed this episode today, please leave us a review either on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever place you go to for podcasts. Lastly, if you're on Twitter, please follow us at OpenWebFounders. I'll see you next week.